The Stranger at Midnight. The rain fell in sheets, drenching the cobblestone streets of the small coastal town of Blackthorn Cove. The storm had rolled in unexpectedly, as if the heavens themselves were mourning something lost. Clara Bennett stood by the window of her bookstore, the whispering pages, her breath fogging up the glass as she watched the downpour. The shop was closed, but she had stayed late to organize a shipment of rare books that had arrived earlier that day. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the dim glow of the street lamp outside cast long shadows across the room. Clara loved nights like this, quiet, solitary, and filled with the scent of old paper and ink. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to the storm, and turned back to the stack of books on the counter. That's when she heard it. A faint knock at the door. Startled, Clara froze. No one should be out in this weather, let alone knocking on her door at this hour. She hesitated, then grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the counter and approached the door. Peering through the frosted glass, she could make out the silhouette of a man, his coat soaked and his hat pulled low over his face. "We're closed," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. The man knocked again, more insistently this time. "Please," he said, his voice deep and urgent. "I need your help." Clara's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to do. The town of Blackthorn Cove was safe, but the late hour and the storm made her wary. Still, something in the man's voice compelled her. She unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him clearly. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his coat dripped water onto the floor. In his hand, he held a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked with age. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, his voice softer now, "but I was told you're the only one who can help me with this." Clara frowned. "Who told you that?" The man hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "An old friend. He said you have a gift for finding the truth in books." Clara's breath caught. She did have a gift, though she rarely spoke of it. Since she was a child, she had been able to sense things about books. Their histories, their secrets, even the emotions of those who had owned them. It was a strange ability, one she had learned to keep hidden. But this stranger seemed to know about it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man held out the book. "This belonged to my father. He disappeared 10 years ago, and this is all I have left of him. I need to know what it means." Clara stared at the book, her curiosity warring with her caution. Finally, she stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. "You'd better come in before you catch your death." The man nodded gratefully and stepped inside, dripping water onto the wooden floor. Clara locked the door behind him and led him to the small sitting area by the fireplace. She lit a fire to chase away the chill, then took the book from him and examined it. The cover was embossed with a strange symbol, a circle with a series of intricate lines running through it. Clara ran her fingers over it, and a shiver ran down her spine. The book felt alive, as if it were humming with some hidden energy. "What's your name?" she asked, looking up at the man. "Elias," he said. "Elias Blackwood." Clara's eyes widened. The Blackwood family was one of the oldest and most mysterious in Blackthorn Cove. They were said to have been involved in everything from smuggling to occult practices, though no one had seen a Blackwood in years. "You're that Blackwood?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Elias nodded, his expression grim. "I know what people say about my family, but I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need answers." Clara hesitated, then opened the book. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, none of which she recognized. But as she turned the pages, she felt a strange pull, as if the book were trying to tell her something. "This isn't just a book," she said slowly. "It's a map, or a key." Elias leaned forward, his eyes intense. "To what?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know yet, but I can feel it. There's something hidden here, something important." Elias's jaw tightened. "My father was obsessed with this book. He spent years studying it, but he never told anyone what he found. Then one night he just vanished. I need to know why. Clara looked at him, her heart aching at the pain in his eyes. She didn't know why, but she felt a connection to him, as if their fates were somehow intertwined. "I'll help you," she said finally, "but you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," Elias said without hesitation. Clara met his gaze. "Whatever we find, we face it together. No secrets." Elias nodded. "No secrets." As the fire crackled in the hearth, Clara and Elias began to unravel the mystery of the book. But neither of them could have guessed the danger that lay ahead, or the secrets that would threaten to tear them apart. The hidden code. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls of the whispering pages. Clara and Elias sat side by side on the worn leather couch, the mysterious book open between them. The storm outside had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the tension in the room was palpable. Clara traced her fingers over the strange symbols on the pages, her brow furrowed in concentration. "These aren't just random markings," she said. "They're part of a code. A cipher, maybe." Elias leaned closer, his shoulder brushing against hers. "Can you decipher it?" "I'm not sure," Clara admitted, "but I think I've seen something like this before." She stood and crossed the room to a tall bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines until she found what she was looking for. A slim, dusty volume titled Ancient Codes and Ciphers of the Maritime World. She brought it back to the couch and flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the text. "Here," she said, pointing to a diagram. "This symbol, it's similar to the ones in your book. It's part of an old sailor's code, used by pirates and smugglers to communicate secretly." Elias's eyes lit up. "So this book could be a message? A set of instructions?" "Possibly," Clara said, "but it's not just a simple code. There's something else here, something darker." She hesitated, then added, "I can feel it. This book isn't just a map or a key. It's a warning." Elias frowned. "A warning about what?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know yet, but we need to be careful. Whatever your father was involved in, it wasn't just smuggling or treasure hunting. This goes deeper." Elias's jaw tightened. "My father was a good man. He wouldn't have been involved in anything dangerous." Clara placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "I'm not saying he was, but sometimes good people get caught up in things they don't understand. We need to find out what this book is trying to tell us." Elias nodded, his expression resolute. "Then let's get to work." For hours, they pored over the book, comparing the symbols to the ones in Clara's reference text. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The symbols formed a series of coordinates, leading to a location just off the coast of Blackthorn Cove. "It's pointing to the old lighthouse," Clara said, her voice tinged with excitement. "The one on Widow's Rock." Elias's eyes narrowed. "That lighthouse has been abandoned for decades. Why would the book lead us there?" "I don't know," Clara said, "but there's only one way to find out." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "We'll go at first light." Clara glanced out the window. The rain had stopped, and the first faint streaks of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. "It's almost morning," she said. "We should get some rest. We'll need our strength for whatever's ahead." Elias looked at her, his expression softening. "Thank you, Clara, for helping me. I know this isn't your problem." Clara smiled faintly. "It is now. Besides, I can't resist a good mystery." Elias chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met." Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. "Get some sleep, Elias. We have a long day ahead." The sun rose over Blackthorn Cove, casting a golden glow over the town. Clara and Elias made their way to the harbor, where Elias had moored a small boat. The sea was calm, the storm of the previous night now a distant memory. As they approached Widow's Rock, the old lighthouse came into view. It stood on a jagged outcrop of stone, its white paint peeling and its windows dark. The place had an eerie, abandoned feel, and Clara couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched. They docked the boat and climbed the narrow path to the lighthouse. The door creaked open with a loud groan, revealing a dusty, dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay. "This place gives me the creeps," Clara muttered as they stepped inside. Elias glanced around, his expression grim. "Let's split up. We'll cover more ground that way." Clara nodded, though she didn't like the idea of being alone in the lighthouse. She took the stairs to the upper levels while Elias searched the ground floor. As she climbed, Clara's unease grew. The lighthouse seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if it were alive. She reached the top floor and found herself in the lantern room, where the massive Fresnel lens once stood. Now it was empty, save for a few broken pieces of glass. But something caught her eye, a small, hidden compartment in the wall. She pried it open and found a folded piece of parchment inside. Her heart raced as she unfolded it and read the words written in a shaky hand. "Beware the curse of the Blackwood line. The treasure you seek comes at a price. Trust no one, not even yourself." Clara's breath caught. Before she could process what she had read, she heard a noise behind her. She turned, but it was too late. A shadowy figure lunged at her, and everything went black. The curse of the Blackwood line. When Clara opened her eyes, her head throbbed with a dull, insistent pain. She was lying on the cold stone floor of the lantern room, the dim light filtering through the broken windows. The shadowy figure was gone, but the folded parchment was still clutched in her hand. She sat up slowly, wincing as the room spun around her. "Elias?" she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. There was no response. Clara's heart pounded as she struggled to her feet. She stumbled down the stairs, calling Elias's name, but the lighthouse was eerily silent. When she reached the ground floor, she found the door wide open, the wind whistling through the gap. Elias was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in. Clara rushed outside, scanning the rocky outcrop for any sign of him. The boat was still moored at the dock, but Elias was gone. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. She was alone. The folded parchment in her hand felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of the curse it mentioned. Clara unfolded it again and read the words more carefully. "Beware the curse of the Blackwood line. The treasure you seek comes at a price. Trust no one, not even yourself." What curse? What treasure? And why had the note warned her to trust no one, not even herself? Clara's mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of the mystery. She needed answers, and there was only one place she could think to find them. Clara returned to the whispering pages, her sanctuary and her source of strength. She locked the door behind her and spread the parchment on the counter, along with the mysterious book Elias had brought her. She spent hours poring over the symbols, cross-referencing them with every text she had on codes, ciphers, and local history. Finally, she found something, a reference to the Blackwood family in an old journal written by a sailor who had frequented Blackthorn Cove in the 1800s. The entry was brief but chilling. "The Blackwoods are cursed, their line tainted by greed and betrayal. They sought the treasure of Widow's Rock, but it was never meant to be found. Those who seek it are doomed to madness or worse." Clara's hands trembled as she read the words. Was this the curse the parchment had warned her about? And if so, what did it have to do with Elias and his father? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She wasn't expecting anyone, and after the events of the past 24 hours, she wasn't sure she could trust anyone. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Clara grabbed the brass candlestick from the counter and approached the door cautiously. She peered through the frosted glass and saw a familiar silhouette. "Elias?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She unlocked the door and opened it, relief flooding through her as she saw him standing there. But something was wrong. His clothes were torn, his face pale and drawn, and his eyes were different. They were darker, almost hollow, as if something inside him had been drained away. "Elias, what happened?" Clara asked, stepping back to let him in. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past her and stood in the middle of the room, his gaze fixed on the book and the parchment on the counter. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "I found something," he said. "Something you need to see." Clara's unease grew. "What is it?" Elias turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "The curse is real, Clara. And it's not just a warning. It's a trap. My father, he didn't disappear. He was taken by the lighthouse." Clara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "What do you mean, taken by the lighthouse?" Elias's hands clenched into fists. "The lighthouse isn't just a building. It's alive. It feeds on those who seek the treasure. My father tried to stop it, but he failed. And now, it's coming for me." Clara's breath caught. "Elias, that's impossible. Lighthouses aren't alive. They're just... You don't understand." Elias interrupted, his voice rising. "I saw it, Clara. I saw the shadows moving, the walls closing in. It's real. And if we don't stop it, it will take us too." Clara took a step back, her mind racing. Was Elias losing his grip on reality? Or was there some truth to his words? She thought of the shadowy figure that had attacked her in the lighthouse, the strange energy she had felt. Could it all be connected? "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had met the night before. "We finish what my father started. We break the curse." Clara nodded, though her heart was heavy with doubt. "How?" Elias picked up the book and handed it to her. "The answers are in here. We just have to find them." For the rest of the day, Clara and Elias worked together, deciphering the symbols and piecing together the story of the Blackwood curse. They learned that the treasure of Widow's Rock was not gold or jewels, but something far more dangerous, a relic of immense power, hidden by the original Blackwood ancestor to protect the world from its influence. But the relic had a will of its own, and it had corrupted the Blackwood line, driving them to madness and despair. As the sun set, Clara and Elias sat in silence, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. "We have to destroy it," Clara said finally. "The relic. It's the only way to break the curse." Elias nodded, but his expression was troubled. "It won't be easy. The lighthouse, it won't let us." Clara reached for his hand, her touch firm and reassuring. "We'll face it together. No secrets, remember?" Elias met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "No secrets. The relic's power." The moon hung low over Blackthorn Cove, casting an eerie silver glow on the waves as Clara and Elias rowed back to Widow's Rock. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged and foreboding against the night sky. Clara clutched the book tightly, her fingers tracing the strange symbols on its cover. Elias sat across from her, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the oars dipping into the water. Elias didn't look at her. "We don't have a choice. If we don't destroy the relic, the curse will never end. And it won't stop with me. It'll come for you, too." Clara shivered, though not from the cold. She had seen the change in Elias since they'd left the lighthouse earlier that day. He was quieter, more distant, as if the curse were already tightening its grip on him. She wanted to believe they could break it, but doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. When they reached the dock, Elias tied the boat and helped Clara onto the rocks. The lighthouse stood before them, its door slightly ajar, as if inviting them inside. Clara hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But Elias took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Together," he said, his voice steady. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his presence. Together, they stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. The lighthouse seemed darker than before, the shadows deeper and more menacing. Clara switched on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom as they made their way to the stairs. "The relic's hidden in the basement," Elias said, his voice low. "That's where my father was last seen." Clara's stomach churned at the thought of descending into the bowels of the lighthouse, but she followed Elias without protest. The stairs creaked under their weight, the sound echoing ominously in the narrow space. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a small, damp room filled with rusted tools and broken furniture. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, and on it sat a small, ornate box. The box was covered in intricate carvings, similar to the symbols in the book. Clara's breath caught as she approached it, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "That's it," Elias whispered. "The relic." Clara set the book down on the pedestal and opened it to the page they had deciphered earlier. The instructions were clear. To destroy the relic, they had to perform a ritual, using the book as a guide. But the ritual required a sacrifice, something of great personal value. "What do we have to sacrifice?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver locket. "This was my mother's. It's all I have left of her." Clara's heart ached for him, but she knew there was no other way. "Are you sure?" Elias nodded, his jaw tight. "It's the only way." They followed the instructions in the book, placing the locket on the pedestal and reciting the incantation written in the margins. As they spoke the final words, the room grew colder, and the air seemed to hum with energy. The box began to glow, a faint, pulsing light that grew brighter with each passing second. Clara's heart raced as she watched the light intensify. "It's working," she whispered. But then, something went wrong. The light suddenly flared, blindingly bright, and a deep, guttural voice filled the room. "You cannot destroy me." Clara stumbled back, her hands flying to her ears. The voice was everywhere, echoing in her mind, filling her with a sense of dread she had never known. She turned to Elias, but he was no longer beside her. He was standing in front of the pedestal, his eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the box. "Elias!" Clara cried, her voice breaking. "What's happening?" Elias turned to her, his expression cold and distant. "The relic, it's too powerful. It's using me." Clara's heart sank. "No, no, Elias, fight it." But Elias didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the box and opened it. Inside was a small, black stone, its surface smooth and unnaturally dark. As soon as Elias touched it, the room seemed to come alive. The shadows twisted and writhed, forming shapes that clawed at the edges of Clara's vision. She backed away, her mind racing. The ritual had failed, or worse, it had backfired. The relic was using Elias as a vessel, and she had no idea how to stop it. "Elias, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "You're stronger than this. You have to fight it." For a moment, Elias's expression softened, and she saw a flicker of the man she had come to care for. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold, hollow gaze of the relic's influence. "Leave, Clara," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Before it's too late." Clara shook her head, her determination hardening. "I'm not leaving you. Not like this." She grabbed the book and flipped through the pages, searching for something, anything, that could help. Her eyes landed on a passage she had overlooked before, a warning written in bold, frantic script. "The relic's power can only be broken by the blood of the Blackwood line." Clara's breath caught. The blood of the Blackwood line. Elias. But what did that mean? Was she supposed to? Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash. She looked up to see Elias, or the thing controlling him, advancing toward her, the black stone clutched in his hand. His eyes were glowing brighter now, and his movements were jerky, unnatural. Clara's mind raced. She had no weapons, no way to defend herself. But she had the book, and she had her wits. She took a deep breath and stood her ground. "Elias," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I know you're still in there. You have to fight this. For your father. For me." For a moment, Elias hesitated, his glowing eyes flickering. Clara saw her chance. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "I believe in you," she whispered, and then, with a sudden, violent shudder, Elias dropped the stone. The light in his eyes faded, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The black stone rolled across the floor, its surface cracking and splintering until it shattered into dust. The room fell silent, the shadows retreating as if they had never been there. Clara knelt beside Elias, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. "Elias?" she said softly. He looked up at her, his eyes clear and filled with emotion. "Clara, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop it." Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You did. You stopped it." Elias reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "The curse? It's over." Clara nodded, relief flooding through her. But as she looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The relic was destroyed, but the lighthouse still stood, its walls humming with a faint, residual energy. "We need to get out of here," she said, helping Elias to his feet. "This place, it's not safe." Elias nodded, leaning on her for support as they made their way back to the stairs. But as they reached the door, Clara glanced back at the pedestal. The book was still there, its pages open to the passage about the blood of the Blackwood line. She hesitated, then turned away. Whatever secrets the book still held, they could wait. For now they had survived, and that was enough. The light in the dark. Clara and Elias stumbled out of the lighthouse, the cold night air a sharp contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside. The moon hung high in the sky, its light reflecting off the waves crashing against Widow's Rock. Elias leaned heavily on Clara, his breathing ragged but steady. The relic was destroyed, the curse seemingly broken, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. "We need to get back to town," Clara said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "You need rest, and we need to figure out what to do next." Elias nodded weakly, his face pale and drawn. "Clara, thank you. I wouldn't have made it out of there without you." Clara gave him a small, tired smile. "You'd have done the same for me." They made their way to the boat, the journey back to Blackthorn Cove feeling longer than it had any right to be. When they finally reached the harbor, Clara helped Elias onto the dock and draped his arm over her shoulders. The town was quiet, the streets empty as they made their way to the whispering pages. Clara unlocked the door and guided Elias inside, settling him onto the couch by the fireplace. "Stay here," she said, grabbing a blanket from a nearby shelf. "I'll make some tea." Elias nodded, his eyes already closing as he leaned back against the cushions. Clara busied herself in the small kitchenette, her mind racing. The relic was gone, but the lighthouse still stood, its presence a constant reminder of the darkness they had faced. And then there was the book that had started it all. She couldn't shake the feeling that it still held answers they hadn't uncovered. When the tea was ready, Clara brought 2 steaming mugs to the couch and sat beside Elias. He took the mug with a grateful nod, his hands trembling slightly as he wrapped them around the warm ceramic. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara sighed, staring into the fire. "I don't know. The relic's destroyed, but the lighthouse is still there. And the book?" She hesitated, then stood and retrieved the book from her bag. "There's something we missed. Something about the blood of the Blackwood line." Elias's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Clara opened the book to the page she had seen in the lighthouse basement. "It says the relic's power can only be broken by the blood of the Blackwood line. But we destroyed it without that." Elias frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. Maybe we didn't need to. Maybe the curse was tied to the relic, and destroying it was enough. Clara shook her head. "I don't think it's that simple. The lighthouse, it's still alive. I can feel it." Elias set his mug down and reached for her hand. "Clara, you've done more than anyone could have asked. You saved me. Maybe it's time to let this go." Clara looked at him, her heart aching at the weariness in his eyes. "I can't. Not until I know for sure that it's over." Elias nodded slowly, his grip on her hand tightening. "Then we'll face it together. One last time." The next morning, Clara and Elias returned to Widow's Rock. The lighthouse stood as it always had, its white paint peeling and its windows dark. But as they approached, Clara felt a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. "It knows we're here," Elias said, his voice low. Clara nodded, clutching the book to her chest. "Let's finish this." They stepped inside, the door creaking open as if inviting them in. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe as they made their way to the basement. The stone pedestal was still there, the remnants of the black stone scattered across the floor. Clara opened the book and read the passage aloud, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The blood of the Blackwood line. It's the key." Elias stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Then let's end this." He took a small knife from his pocket and made a shallow cut on his palm, letting the blood drip onto the pedestal. As soon as the first drop hit the stone, the room began to shake, the walls groaning as if in pain. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Elias like tendrils, but Clara stepped in, placing her hand over his. "Together," she said, her voice firm. The light from the book flared, brighter than before, and the shadows recoiled, screaming as they were consumed by the light. The lighthouse shuddered, its walls cracking and crumbling as the curse was finally broken. When the light faded, the room was silent. The pedestal was gone, the stone floor smooth and unmarked. The lighthouse was just a lighthouse, its presence no longer menacing. Clara and Elias stood together, their hands still clasped. The curse was over, the darkness lifted. But as they made their way back to the boat, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. The mystery was solved, but at a cost. Back in Blackthorn Cove, Clara and Elias sat by the fireplace in the whispering pages, the book resting on the table between them. The storm had passed, and the town was quiet once more. "What will you do now?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something more. "I think I'll stay here, for a while at least. There's nothing left for me out there." Clara smiled faintly. "You're always welcome here." Elias reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Thank you, Clara, for everything." Clara's heart swelled as she met his gaze. The mystery had brought them together, but it was their connection that had seen them through. And as they sat there, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, Clara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.